workshop with React.JS. Essentially, React is kind of like a library that allows you to do web pages. I'm going to assume that some of you guys have some sort of exposure to HTML and CSS. I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but at least this should be fairly easy enough to follow. So, enough talk. Let's talk why. My name's Ashley, student here. I'm here for a bit of a while. Computer science major, and I work over at Ultimate Software as a software engineer. So pretty much what I do on my day-to-day is to try to see if you can squeeze in. I don't know if they're open. And there's plenty of other hackathons that are easily accessible for students that you guys can sign up for throughout the year. So let's go from there. So let's go into React. So first thing you guys are going to need to do is actually go to this URL right here, which is kind of like the JavaScript playground. Let me see if I can make that bigger for you guys. Can you guys see? Well, that's like on screen. So I'll say that out loud. So that's bit.ly/2x capital A, lowercase c, lowercase a, capital Z, R. I'm going to do it myself also. Is everyone on? Does everyone see HTML? Yep. All right, cool. So it's kind of like an interactive playground rather than actually doing these things on our computer. We can kind of like just play with the language in the library and see how things work and get familiarized with the constructs. So at the top is going to be HTML. You can click on the CSS tab and it'll pretty much open you a CSS pane. And right here we can actually write some CSS. So I'll go ahead and say body. And I'll say I want the background to be of color of black, or at least some sort of dark color. But we don't see anything. So if you actually click on output, which is on the far right, it'll give us what it should look like. All right, there you go. So you see that the body's kind of okay, there you go. So this here on the far right is what it would look like if you're on a web page. So simulating as you're writing, putting the making the edits to the source code here, you guys will get immediate feedback on what it does. So now let's move on to what we're here for, which is React. If you click on that where you see ES6/Babel and actually kind of like remove the console section. And you can also click out the CSS so that it's all just the 3 panes of the HTML, the JavaScript, and then the output. Actually, sorry about that. I'm going to go back to the CSS and remove it because I can't see a thing. But once you remove the CSS, you should see the hidden message. All right. So I'm kind of do like a layman's term what React does. And it's a view library. It's not a framework like, I don't know if you guys have heard Angular or Vue or whatnot. All it is, it's a JavaScript library that allows you to sort of create HTML using just JavaScript rather than writing the markup all in here. So what this allows you to do is kind of like have more dynamic, or at least add more dynamic behavior to your web pages with much less. So For starters, let me zoom in. All right, cool. So for starters, we have a component. Now you can create a component by defining a class, similar to how things are done in Java. Let me type HTML. So yeah, so I define my class and I extend it from React.component. And React.component is kind of like, I guess, the parent class that defines all the underlying behavior that allows that component or that class to render onto the web page. And each component, if it has any like view that you want to have, must have a render function within it. So this is why we have the render method or function. I'm going to use these two interchangeably. And it returns some markup. Now this is a pretty common. If you've seen JavaScript, this is the first time that you probably will, well, if you're familiar with JavaScript, it's probably the first time that you're seeing HTML inside of JavaScript. This is kind of like a subset of JavaScript, which uses XML and allows you to write those XML inside of JavaScript without putting it as string. Because writing this as string will be kind of annoying. I'm pretty sure you guys have had experience with standard that out where you have to like constantly concatenate multiple lines. So doing web pages that way isn't pretty tenable. So which is why XML was brought up in the case. So actually, let's go ahead and actually try to modify certain things. And this is getting an update. So I want this to be more dynamic. So I'm gonna create a variable, and I'm gonna say name is equal to a string, which is Ashley. Now Ashley doesn't show up here, obviously because I'm not telling the render function what to do with that variable. So I want to go ahead and actually output that variable. What we use is that we use the curly braces to actually put, render or compute or evaluate certain JavaScript expressions. So if I put name, it should then show up. There we go. Now, how does this React actually get down to the HTML and get rendered? And that's all done with what you see here at the bottom, which is the React.render function. And that's kind of how it attaches to the web page. I'm going to go ahead and open the HTML side. And if we see here in the body, I have a div with an ID of React_example. And here at the bottom, you see how I reference document.getElement by ID? That tells me where, or that tells the web page where it should inject the React container for where everything that I do now as React it will render within this container, or at least this div. And that's how we got here. But you can't just go ahead and define things, right? The goal is to kind of create a proof of concept, and I'm just gonna throw it out there. Probably gonna do like some sort of like a feed that gets input from some source, whether it's an API or a socket string, right? So this feed is going to be getting strings of URLs to render, right? So if we want to render those strings, we kind of want to have a way to pass it down to my component, in this case, which is my hello component. So when we do that is by creating a property. A property, when it's rendered in XML, looks almost exactly like an HTML attribute. So in this case, in hello component, I'm going to say name, and it's equal to Ashley. However, if I remove this here, I should get an error. So why is that? So the way we get this value that we're passing in from the component or the markup to where we want it to output is by using this .props.name. So let me actually do something. There we go. So now it renders. So before we render it, I'm going to go ahead and console.log this.props. Actually, I'm going to render. Let's do that in the constructor. Oh, sorry. Got it. Okay, cool. So now that it's rendering the object, what it does is that it intelligently detects, okay, here are all the properties for this component, and it just puts it in a prop object. So now if I add a new key, let's say bank with the value of named, we'll see it'll actually show up right here in the props. It gets populated inside that props object. So then I can just go ahead, hello, Ashley, I want to say Lord. Select a prefix for Lord. So in this case, I want to say this dot props dot bank, and it'll say hello Ashley, me Lord. Well, no, that makes no sense. So we're going to change name from bank to, I guess, prefix. And you see how it changes all dynamically, which is kind of awesome. Given so you don't, given what we exposed to in school with Java, is that we don't have to do all this additional boilerplate and creating like multiple classes just to get something to render in JavaScript Paint. Yeah, so that's kind of how we can pass data through this component. So now, since it's going to be rendering links and we want it to render links, let's kind of like modify this component a little bit, right? So the way we render images in HTML is with which tag? Can anybody tell me? Anybody tell me? Come on. Anything? Render images with what tag? Close. Come on. I'm gonna ask some participation. Help me out. Help me out. I don't want to feel like Christina over here. All right, so it's with an image tag. It's pretty straightforward. And the image tag is with let me post some things here. Actually, let's trim this up a little bit. That's pretty good. And I put our H1, and we're going to put our image. Pretty straightforward. Now source. Okay, anybody wonder where we're going to get our source from? Passed in from the top level component. So in this case, actually right now let's already code that. Let's get some image from the internet. My favorite cartoon. Well, it says Rick and Marty. What the hell? It seems good enough. So I'm going to go here, copy image address, and go back to the image bin, and paste that in there, and boom, it renders. I'm literally making this up as I go because I just only prepared the slide, so hopefully I do a better job. Is this being recorded? Oh man, what have I done? Okay, cool. So that's our image, and again outputted. All right, cool. Sounds good. Now I kind of want to change the dynamic where I can kind of like call an API and get all these images from. So we're going to switch and we're going to make this kind of like imaginary array. There's a var images equals to an array, very similar to how you do it in Java. And if you have some familiarity with JavaScript, this is pretty mundane for first start. So start it, bear with me. If I do multiple of these, alright, cool. So now I have 4 images of the same. Alright, cool. Then now, what I'm going to do is actually pass. Take this. There we go. put it in the wrap. Here we render our component. But it's pretty much very similar to what we did when we had it before. So it's not going to render the images. So we need to iterate through these images. So the beauty of doing having React as a library that allows us to create HTML is that we can just use plain old JavaScript to literally just do a simple loop through this array and render the components. So let's go ahead and do that. So the way that would look is that I'm going to create a block using the curly braces. And then I'm going to go ahead and map my images and kind of like transform each element within that array. So you have the images, and there's a map function that takes in another function, right? So the function for each will return, will get passed one property at a time, or one element. And here is where I will return that. But since we're now talking about images, we don't need name, we don't need prefix, we just need image. Alright? It's just, technically this is a variable, I can't just put it within a string, that won't really work. So for dynamic values, you can simply create a block for a property and pass that in to it like this. Not getting any lines?
Images.
Where?
On the line, images. Is you running images and there you go. You have a component
Cool. So I got image right here. Oh, okay. So here in the source, I'm not actually rendering anything. Thank you. The teamwork. So props dot image. Boom. Look at that. Very simple. Simple line change allows us to actually dynamically do all of these things. So that is kind of like how you can play around with properties and pass it from components to components. But the principle of React is that it does data binding it doesn't do data binding two ways. It sends data one way. The reason why is that it causes other bugs, which is why what we see in Angular. So it's simple. So if my data now changes, what it'll do is that it'll go ahead and re-render everything. Oops, sorry. And here we should have this. All right, cool. Now let's kind of break this down a little bit because it's just happening. Cool. So another way to create components in React is by simply writing a function that returns markup. So you don't actually, if it just returns like renders, it's a good practice to just have a simple function because it reduces all the complexity of how React works. So let's say I have a function that's just going to be a container for those images, right? So I'm going to call it gallery. Function, and that is going to return a block, which is right. Since gallery is going to be taking multiple child components inside of it, so a gallery has multiple images that are going to be running inside of it, we kind of want to render those components out that it gets, right? So those gets attached to the div props as a property, but in the children for key. So let's see how that works. So I'm going to change this to be gallery. And let's go type it. Right? But let's actually go ahead and console.log out to see if I'm pointing it to the right place. There we go. So you're saying that each child in the array, whenever I'm running something, must have a key. Now, this is important so that it knows the order in which to place these. So for my images, I'm going to go ahead and give them a unique key. Which I can get from the second parameter of this function, which is I. Like my battery's like stuck at 4%, so it's like good forever. Oh my gosh, I lost everything. Oh, that has to be the worst. Oh, wow. All right, cool. Gotcha, man. That's perfectly fine because that kind of like leads into a segue because basically React is really you're building tiny components that you could build together and plug and to make other bigger components. Pretty much think of Legos. That's really like kind of the core principles on which you build apps with React. So with that, if most of you have, well, if you guys have Node installed, we're actually going to go ahead and kind of like do like an actual proof of concept. So rather than just going to a concept, we're going to build the code. So go to your terminal or go create a project folder. I'm going to create a new one right here. Go to wherever you want to create a new project. And once you're there, you have the terminal open, you're going to do npm install -g create React app. Now where that looks, then you can go ahead and I'm going to make a directory, PLC, go into PLC, all right? So where that looks is I'm going to npm install -g create React app. Yeah. Oh, so what Create React App is a utility that allows you to pretty much, it does most of the work, but as far as setting up the HTML, connecting the React to HTML, and all of the unnecessary stuff that keeps you from actually getting and actually work on the idea that you're trying to build out. I'm going to go ahead and install that. For that 10 gig network to continue. And once you're done, you're going to do the first thing that you know the person should do when starting a node project, and that's called and that is initializing the project as a node project. So you're going to run npm init for those of you that are at that step. Actually, hold off on that. Yeah, hold off on that. Yeah. Alright, cool. So once Create React App is installed, I can literally go ahead and actually write that command. Create React App and pass it a name for your app. So in the case, I'm going to do POC, or I'm just going to call it theme. I'm going to do all this extra work for me. So if create React app is installed, once it's installed, run create React app and pass it a name, which would be the name of your app. If you don't have a name yet, you can use the name I'm using, which is theme, F-E-M-E, which is kind of like me, but with F, because we're going to be writing a feed of memes. See what I did there? Oh, so when I open the terminal, I install create React app. And once you install create React app, then you use create React app by saying create React app and then pass it along. Oh no, sorry, I was browsing through my directories. Yeah. All right, cool. Now notice that it actually went ahead and created a theme folder for me. Is everyone caught up? No? Still installing? All right, I'll give it a while. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I thought it was an upload. Was it upload lesson? Was it upload lesson?
I think I'm zoomed into it.
Is that another?
Can't apply that to some like Steve about it. He might not do it though.
If we get the HDMI, the mini HDMI from the Nikon camera that I have to the computer, that has better quality, and I think we pick it up.
You pick it up.
Yeah.
That might be.
It might be better.
Okay, so well, everybody's kind of setting up to finish the workshop. You guys can go ahead and get food. Please do one slide per person. The plates are there on the bag. I'm gonna open it right now. And also, don't make a mess, please.
No, I left my pizza in the office. Actually, I'm going to get my pizza.
Also, if you haven't signed in, the sign-in sheet is on the table with the buttons. You're also welcome to get an ACM button if you want one. Please do that. So buttons are up next to the pizza on the table to the left. So on you can get one. Feel free to sign in.
As you grab the pizza, if you haven't signed in, make sure you sign in, okay?
Yeah, don't get worried about the index. Index is scratch, so. Create React app, bifurcating, and then space name. Yeah, and then it's going to create a project for you with that name. There you go. So once that's done, it's going to give you a set of commands.
What time does this end? This ends at 5? Okay. I might leave a little earlier than that. I might leave her a little earlier than that.
Do we still need the feed?
Well, you might not get the Q&A.
Oh.
Might not be a big deal.
let me just do that. And we'll go ahead and actually launch up a server and have the site up when that's done. So what else happening? Let me actually open that up. All right, cool. Is everyone able to open up their app? No problem. Huh? 5 seconds. All right, cool. So we should be good. All right. So if you actually open up that folder, you'll have some files in there. So in this case, we have the standards README for documentation and the package.json, which declares what the dependencies are for that project. And if you go into source, is where you'll see the CSS and the JavaScript that run this app. All right. So let's start with index.js. So you see here we just like before, we declare the entry point on how React gets bound to the HTML page. And if we click on app, we see what's the containing app component. So in here, what we're going to do is that we're going to create smaller components to use within it. Okay. So let's actually do this. What we're going to do is that we're going to change the app option. Inside the app intro, we're going to create an image. Source. And we're going to get image tag from somewhere. Like before. And then we go back to our app. It should reload and actually insert that image. Is everyone caught up so far? Hey, fellas. Fellas. Hey, what's your name? Are you guys good? All right, cool. So let's go back now. Let's create a new component. So we're gonna say const, and we're gonna say image. Is equal to a function that takes in a var. So we're going to say source, and it's going to return. Right, so we're going to copy the image that we have, put it inside of here. And we're going to write our image. Render and refresh the page by itself automatically, and make changes, and we're all good and we're all set. Cool. So the next step is to actually create a URL, like a text field that actually inputs, so that we can pass in URLs. That we can pretty much pass in URLs, images get pasted. So we go ahead and write that at the top. There we go. All right, input. This is a type text. Replace folder. Insert URL. Insert URL here, it shows up. Cool. So now what we're going to do is actually kind of bind an event onto this. So we're going to say, hey, whenever the values or someone types inside this URL, this input, update this value. So what we're going to do now is we're going to declare a state. And where we're going to have the state is that we're going to have that declared in the constructor. Think of the state kind of like as your instance variables that you would have in a Java class. So we'll create a constructor. And I'm going to say this dot state is equal to, and pass create a URL. And you can have a value of empty string. Okay. So now I'm going to have one that's going to say update URL. I'm going to create a method. Right. And that takes a value. And that's going to update the state. Now the way you update the state, or which is what, or the URL, we're going to use the set state method. So we're going to say this dot set state. And passing the value. So in space, we're going to be URL is equal to value. Let's say value. Now we have an input that's also included buttons for save or send. We'll have a button and we're going to have it say send. Now we want to update the URL. Or how let's say actually submit the value of that URL when I click that button. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say send URL. So URL, actually not URL. And what this is going to do is that we're going to make some sort of API call. All right. So for now, let's create a variable, the URL that we're going to get from this dot state. URL. So just like before, how we have this dot props, this dot state contains all the values that's what I declared in the state. Cool. So now we actually have no mechanism of actually sending these values anywhere. So before the workshop, there was some arbitrary API or something that stood up that allows us to do real-time communication, kind of used for chats. So what we're going to do is install a plugin that allows us to actually send those messages into that channel. Pretty much long enough to let that. So let's go back to our console. Our console. It's not long before secret. So you see when you actually make an error, it'll actually render it for you here on the view and also in the command line. So it's actually pretty awesome experience. So that way you actually know when you're bumping or doing something wrong. And go ahead and declare super, declare constructor. And we should be set. And it's fine. Done again, it's fine. Cool. So now let's work on doing the functionality. So the tool we're going to be using is socket.io. I don't know if that's the right URL, but let's finish cross. Alright, perfect. And typically what I usually do is when you realize that, oh, this is a technology, particularly, especially in the hackathon setting, you have that time, like 20 minutes or 30 minutes to actually learn that tool. So the way of doing it is to simply go to Getting Started and follow the documentation. And usually they will tell you how to set it up and get everything working, right? So let's say your teammate already stood up that socket.io server. All you have to do is build your app and connect to that socket.io server and send messages to it and actually receive messages and display the messages that you get, right? So let's actually go to it. Oh, not really. Chat app, but the docs. All right, cool. So let's go on the client. So here we see that we actually with socket, we declare it, and then we do add a listener on the news event, and then pretty much we get the data in that function. So let's go ahead and copy this. And we're going to place it somewhere handy over here. And we're going to comment it out for now. So we need to actually download the library somehow, right? So let's go ahead and see what the command is for installing. So you see here it is. It's npm install socket.io. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run that command, which I would recommend you guys to also do. npm install socket.io. The reason why it's important to always reference the documentation is that a lot of times there are other tools with similar naming patterns, and you might have a library for something that does something completely different but has a similar name. So if it comes to the 9th hour and you guys are like, oh my gosh, I don't know why it's not connecting, that may be why. So it's always good to have the documentation handy and side by side as you're coding. Oh, so NPM is, it stands for Node Package Management. That's pretty much all it does. It knows that there are libraries in a central repository and they're labeled and they have different versions. So when I say, hey, NPM, I want this library, it'll get me the latest version for that library because it knows. And it'll install it locally on my machine. So it's to finish installing. But while that's happening, you can still write the code, right? So let's go ahead and actually do an import, bring that library in. And the way we do that is with the imports, similar to Java. Same concept. So I'm going to say socket from socket.io. Now, when you pass in the from and you pass in the string, it's important that this matches with what you have explicitly installed. That's the only way it's going to reference the right library. So actually, I'm going to add. Cool. So now I can go ahead and uncomment this. All right. Rather than it being IO, I went ahead and I kind of aliased the IO library as socket. So I'll say, hey, socket to localhost. That's going to change a little bit. Create a variable IO, and then here I can say IO. So that's that for now, right? So let's find out the location or the URL per se of that socket.io server. So I have to back up something else. Go ahead and actually use this URL. How about I'm gonna copy this URL. Paste it inside here. So for you guys to see, when you place my command, is https ://28 fd 6d and then 3d.ngrok.io. So now I'm going to take this little piece here that's the event listener. I'm going to take that out. Now we've declared our connection. And what I want to do is whenever the component renders, connect to that connection and listen for a particular message that we want. All right? So there's a method for it, which is component did mount. So that's a lifecycle component. There are several, which is before it mounts, after it, which is renders, and before it de-renders or removes from the DOM. You can actually go to the React.JS documentation, and they'll go ahead and dive deeper into it. So what I want to do is, okay, once the component is mounted, I'm going to listen to the it's lit event and actually get some data. And you see here we also have an emit event. An emit is how I can send a message to that server. So everything else that's listening to that server will also receive those messages. So remember how I had the same URL? You can actually go ahead and put it in there. Because now we actually have a place and a mechanism to send those messages. And so my data is just going to be this state that URL. Make it a bit more structured. Let's do this. Actually, is equal to the value for this thing. Is everyone kind of like following along so far? Good? All right, cool. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, whenever I click this button, perform the action that sends the data. So that's going to be with the onClick attribute. And that's how you can actually define a function to that list for that button. And I'm going to say this dot send URL. You can scroll now, maybe so you guys can see it's not too zoomed in. All right, cool. Long, I'm going to say sending this dot URL. So we can actually debug and see if it's working perfectly as expected. Oh no, that error.
Software IO input.
Good catch, however, I know that it's all the shit. It really doesn't. So I'm going to go ahead and take the server down, and the way you do that is with Control-C. It'll shut it down so you can actually redo it, start it back up. So I'm going to do npm start again, and hopefully this time it actually brings that dependency in. And we have an error. Oh yeah? Alright, cool. So I'm going to try that, the install command again. This is like the next super slow, extremely slow. I feel like half this workshop has been just like waiting on this thing to like process or render or download. Hmm? No, not over here. This thing? So, alright, cool. So, we'll get as far as we do get. So what I'll do is I'll actually like complete it, and I'll post it on Git, and then you will find it on the ACM Facebook page. And from there on, you guys will be able to follow up. And I'll also provide some additional resources and courses and stuff that you guys can follow along and pretty much get up to par, up to speed with React. I do recommend to probably keep an eye on it for tonight if this is your first time, and if you guys are planning also on going to Shell Hacks tomorrow, if this is your first hackathon. So at least it'll be your first try to practice, and I'll definitely be in attendance at Shell Hacks. So if you guys see me, feel free to definitely reach out and help. Ask for help, because that's most likely what I'll be there for. As a mentor. I think it's still downloading, and we have like 9 minutes to get looked up. Bro.
What did you do to fix the NPM start?
So that's what I was trying right now. So a trick that you could do is normally I blow out my node modules folder, and I use Yarn. I think it's probably because I was using NPM. That's probably why I'm taking for. I'm having some issues. But I've found that there's a better experience using Yarn than there is using NPM. So definitely hop on Yarn, because one, it's faster in the way that it handles the dependencies, and also doesn't do too many callouts, unnecessary callouts to the API, and yeah. Yep. Yeah, I'm gonna put this on Git, and you guys are gonna see a message on Facebook with the URL.
What is RS? RS. You know what RM is?